Golden Execution. Chapter 1. The Weight of 50 Years. The silence of a 20,000 square foot mansion at 6 a.m. is a specific kind of heavy. It isn't the absence of sound, it's the presence of history. For Robert, waking up on the morning of his 50th birthday, that silence felt like a victory lap. He stood on the balcony of the primary suite, looking out over 300 acres of manicured perfection. To the world, Robert was a titan, a man who had turned a struggling logistics firm into a global juggernaut. To himself, he was simply a man who had survived. He had survived the lean years of the 90s, the cutthroat mergers of the early 2000s, and the relentless pressure of being the smartest person in every room he entered. 50 years, half a century. It's the age where a man is supposed to stop building and start enjoying. Behind him, Sarah stirred in the silk sheets. She was 34, radiant even in sleep, the kind of woman who made men at country clubs stop mid-sentence. They had been married for 3 years. To Robert, she was the reward for a lifetime of labor. "Happy birthday, Gravity," she whispered, her voice thick with sleep as she stepped onto the balcony to wrap her arms around his waist. "How does it feel to be a legend?" "It feels expensive," Robert joked, leaning back into her. He didn't know then that by noon the legend would be a lie, and the expensive part would be the only thing keeping him from total ruin. Chapter 2. The Fortress of 2012. To understand why Robert didn't panic when the world ended, you have to understand the mind of a man who builds for the worst-case scenario. In 2012, 3 years before he even met Sarah at a charity gala in Aspen, Robert had a realization. He was worth $400 million, and he was a target. He had seen friends lose half their net worth to irreconcilable differences. He had seen empires carved up like Thanksgiving turkeys by divorce courts. He flew to the Cook Islands. He met with a team of asset protection architects, lawyers who don't just write wills, but build digital and legal fortresses. They created the Blackwood Irrevocable Trust. It was a masterpiece of legal engineering. Robert transferred 95% of his wealth into it. Technically, he owned nothing. He lived in a house owned by the trust. He flew on a jet owned by the trust. He collected a salary as a consultant to the trust's holdings. The key was the irrevocable status. Once the assets were in, they were out of his hands. He couldn't take them back just because he wanted to buy a sports team. This meant that in the eyes of the law, these assets were not his. They existed in a vacuum. When he married Sarah 3 years later, he didn't ask for a prenuptial agreement. Sarah's lawyers, if she had any at the time, likely looked at his public filings and saw a man with immense access to wealth, but very little title to it. They assumed the growth of that wealth during the marriage would be fair game. They were wrong. The trust was a closed loop, and Robert had been holding the key for over a decade. Chapter 3. The Notification. The party preparations were a symphony of chaos. Florists were unloading 10,000 white roses. The caterers were debating the temperature of the Wagyu sliders. Robert retreated to his sanctuary, a soundproof office in the North Wing. At 10:14 a.m., his phone buzzed. It was an automated alert from the Perimeter Security app. Usually, these were false alarms. A deer tripping a sensor or a delivery driver taking a wrong turn near the guest cottage at the edge of the woods. This cottage was rarely used, a secluded mid-century modern glass box nestled 3 miles from the main house. Robert opened the live feed. The camera wasn't outside. It was the internal living room sensor, triggered by heat and motion. The video buffered for 3 seconds. 3 seconds where Robert's heart beat normally for the last time. The feed cleared. There was Sarah. She wasn't in her spa robe. She was in a sundress Robert hadn't seen before, and she wasn't alone. The man was Marcus, the artisan contractor who had spent the last 6 months restoring the ballroom. The video wasn't a suggestion of infidelity. It was a documentary. Robert watched. He didn't feel the heat of anger. He felt a profound, chilling cold. It was the same feeling he got when a competitor tried to hostilely take over his board of directors. It wasn't emotional, it was tactical. He downloaded the clip. He uploaded it to 3 separate cloud servers. He then called Marcus, not the man in the video, but his personal attorney, Arthur. "Arthur," Robert said, his voice flat. "It's time to activate the contingency. The party is still on. But the guest list just changed." Chapter 4. The Performance. How do you look at a person who has betrayed your soul and smile? At 7 p.m., the first limousines began to crawl up the driveway. Robert stood in the foyer, dressed in a Tom Ford tuxedo. Sarah stood beside him, a vision in gold sequins, her hand tucked firmly into the crook of his arm. "You're so quiet, birthday boy," she whispered, leaning in to kiss his cheek. "Are you overwhelmed?" "In a way," Robert replied. Throughout the night, Robert moved through the crowd like a ghost in his own life. He shook hands with senators. He toasted with CEOs. Every time he looked at Sarah, he didn't see the woman he loved. He saw a liability. He saw a breach of contract. He watched her move through the room. She was the perfect wife. She charmed the donors. She laughed at the right times. She was so confident in her position, so sure that she was the queen of this $500 million hill. What she didn't know was that while she was sipping champagne, two men in unremarkable suits were sitting in a parked car at the end of the driveway. They were process servers, and they were holding the papers that would reduce her world to ash. Chapter 5. The Toast, 8:30 p.m. The ballroom was a sea of black ties and shimmering gowns. The 50 ice sculpture was beginning to sweat under the heat of the chandeliers. "Ladies and gentlemen," Sarah said into the microphone standing at the podium. Her voice was amplified through a $50,000 sound system. "To know Robert is to know strength. He is a man who builds things to last. Our marriage, his business, this very home, everything he touches is built on a foundation of iron." She turned to Robert, her eyes glistening with performative tears. "To 50 years of excellence and to the next 50 years of us." The room erupted. Robert stepped up to the podium. He waited for the silence to become uncomfortable. He waited until the only sound was the hum of the projector cooling fan. "Sarah is right," Robert began. "I do build things to last, but a house is only as strong as its foundation, and sometimes you find out the foundation has been rotted through by someone you let inside." He didn't look at the crowd. He looked at the AV technician in the back. The massive screen behind him flickered to life. It wasn't a montage of Robert's childhood. It wasn't a thank you to his partners. It was the cottage. It was the sundress. It was Marcus. The gasp that went through the room wasn't human. It was the sound of 300 people losing their breath at once. Sarah's face didn't just go pale. It went gray. She reached for the podium to steady herself, her mouth opening, but no sound coming out. "The party is over," Robert said into the silence. "The marriage ended at 10:14 this morning. The process servers are in the foyer. Sarah, you have 1 hour to gather your personal effects. Anything not in your name stays with the trust." Chapter 6. The Day Zero Fallout. The 24 hours following the birthday divorce were a whirlwind of digital fire and social wreckage. In the age of the smartphone, a room of 300 socialites doesn't stay quiet. By 2 a.m., the grainiest, most frantic clips of the ballroom screen were circulating on private WhatsApp groups. By 6 a.m., the story had hit the tabloid blind items. But while the world gossiped, the actual players were in a state of clinical warfare. Sarah didn't go to a hotel. She went to the only person she thought could break a $500 million seal, Julian Vane, a divorce attorney known as the Kraken. Vane didn't just win cases, he dismantled lives. "He played a video?" Vane asked Sarah in his glass-walled office that morning, in front of the CEO of the National Bank, in front of his own board of directors. "Yes," Sarah whispered, her face pale. "He humiliated me. I want half. I want the house, the jet, and the logistics shares. I want him to hurt the way I hurt last night." Vane smiled. "Public humiliation is a double-edged sword, Sarah. He gave us a gift. We'll claim intentional infliction of emotional distress. We'll claim the trust is an alter ego for his personal spending. We'll pierce that veil and bleed him dry." What Vane didn't know, and what Sarah was too panicked to realize, was that Robert hadn't acted out of impulse. Every humiliation was a calculated move to bait Sarah into a specific legal strategy. By making it public, he forced her to fight for her reputation, which meant she had to engage in a discovery process he had already rigged. Chapter 7. The Trust versus the Kraken. The legal discovery phase is where most wealthy divorces are won or lost. It's the forensic autopsy of a lifestyle. Vane's team descended on Robert's finances like vultures. They demanded every receipt, every wire transfer, and every distribution from the Blackwood Irrevocable Trust. They were looking for the gotcha moment. If Robert had ever used the trust's credit card to buy a pack of gum or a personal suit, Vane could argue that the trust wasn't a separate legal entity, but merely a purse for Robert. If the trust was a sham, the $500 million would be dragged back into the marital estate, and Sarah would walk away with $250 million. For 3 months, Robert lived in a modest 2-bedroom apartment, also owned by the trust. He drove a 10-year-old sedan. He stopped all luxury distributions. "He's starving us out," Sarah hissed to her lawyer as the months dragged on. Her credit cards, the ones Robert had graciously allowed her to use during the marriage, had been canceled the night of the party. She was living on loans from friends, her social currency evaporating as the video continued to haunt her. Then, Vane found it. A wire transfer, $4 million, sent from the trust to a private holding company in the Caymans, just 6 months after the wedding. "We have him," Vane told Sarah. "He moved marital potential growth into an offshore account. That's fraud. That's our way in." They filed the motion to compel. They went to court, confident they had found the crack in the iron wall. Robert sat in the courtroom, wearing a suit that looked 5 years old. He looked tired. He looked beat. But when the judge asked for the explanation of the $4 million transfer, Robert's lawyer simply handed over a single notarized document. The money hadn't been a transfer. It was a loan the trust had made to Robert's company at a staggering 12% interest rate. Robert had been paying his own trust back with his marital salary. He wasn't hiding money from Sarah. He was legally spending their marital income to pay back a debt to the trust he didn't own. He was legally making himself poor while making the trust richer, and it was all perfectly, maddeningly legal. Chapter 8. The Social Exile. Money is one thing, but in Robert's world, access is the real currency. As the legal battle bled into the 6-month mark, the social consequences for Sarah became a slow-motion execution. In high society, everyone loves a scandal, but no one wants to be near the loser of one. Sarah found her invitations to the Met Gala redirected. Her friends were suddenly unavailable for brunch. The man from the video, Marcus, the contractor, was long gone. Robert had sued him for breach of contract and tortious interference, effectively bankrupting his small business and ensuring he would never work on a luxury estate again. Marcus had fled the state, leaving Sarah to face the wreckage alone. Robert, meanwhile, began to reappear. He didn't gloat. He didn't talk to the press. He simply attended board meetings and charity auctions, a tragic figure of a man who had been betrayed but held his dignity. He was playing the long game. He knew that Sarah's legal fees were mounting. Vane, the Kraken, wasn't working for free. Sarah was burning through her meager savings, betting everything on a settlement that was never coming. One evening, Sarah sat in her lawyer's office. "How much longer?" "He won't settle," Vane admitted, looking at the mountain of failed motions. "He's not fighting for the money, Sarah. He's fighting for the principle. He's willing to spend $10 million in legal fees to make sure you don't get $1 million. It's a scorched earth policy." "But it's his birthday," she whispered, realizing the date. It had been exactly 1 year since the party. He won. Chapter 9. The final signature. 1 year and 1 day after the video played in the ballroom, Sarah signed the papers. She got nothing, no alimony, waived in exchange for Robert dropping the intentional infliction of emotional distress countersuit he had filed against her for the public embarrassment he suffered. She got no share of the trust. She got to keep her jewelry and the clothes she had taken in that one frantic hour after the party. The final meeting was held in a neutral conference room. No cameras, no guests. Robert pushed a small velvet box across the table. "What is this?" Sarah asked, her voice trembling. "Open it." Inside was the 50th birthday watch she had bought him with his own money the week before the party. He hadn't worn it once. "I don't want anything from that year," Robert said. He stood up, looking younger than he had on the night of the party. The weight of the secret was gone. The weight of the defense was gone. "You had everything," he said, not with anger, but with a terrifyingly calm observation. "You had a $500 million life. All you had to do was be the person you pretended to be." He walked out of the room, leaving Sarah alone with a watch that didn't tick and a future that had no foundation. Robert stepped into the elevator. He tapped his phone. The trust's monthly distribution alert popped up. His poverty was over. The sedan was being replaced by a bespoke SUV. The 2-bedroom apartment was being traded for a villa in Switzerland. Robert was 50 years old. He was a half-billionaire, and he was entirely alone. He took a sip of a very expensive scotch bought by the trust and looked at the security feed of the front gate. It was closed. It was locked. He had spent his life building a fortress. And the thing about a fortress is that while it keeps the enemies out, it also keeps the builder in. He was safe. He was rich. And for the first time in 50 years, he was truly, terrifyingly free.